So I'd like to talk this morning, this afternoon, depending where you are, a little bit about the what are biorational substances and what's the context, what's happening in the world with them. I work primarily in Europe, but also across America, across Africa, Australia, New Zealand. So I sort of have a broad perspective of what's going on with the technologies. I'm just trying to... Yeah. Sorry, some of the pictures I'm going. So the situation we're in the world at the moment is that we have more than 8 billion people, and we know that the food production's got to increase by 70% to feed the growing population. And we also know for vector-borne diseases that over 70% of all infectious diseases, that there's over 700,000 deaths annually, and that's possibly a slight underestimate of the problem. So the world faces big problems both in food production and also in management of diseases for humans. And the position we're in now is sort of thinking, well, what technologies do we have available? If we think about plant protection or crop losses, we know that we're losing 30 to 40% of the crops before harvest, and we're losing more than 10% after harvest. We know that this is an incredible cost to agriculture of over 220 billion per year, and then the cost to human health is sort of over 94 billion. So it says, well, we have these systems for managing pests and diseases, but actually they're slightly, the processes we're using now, even with the best technology, we're not being successful in really managing the problems. And it always makes me reflect, as saying, well, if I had a model that was failing 30 or 40% of the time, would I keep using the model? And that's sort of what we've been doing. I know that the high input system of fertilizers, varieties, and synthetic pesticides really helped the world and moved on from poverty. But since then, we've actually been quite static in the model that we've used and the approaches that we've taken. And I think we're in a really interesting point in the world where we're realizing that the models don't work. So we're both changing the technologies we have, and we're also changing the models which we work. And I'm going to explore a little bit about that and what that means. So one of the things we look at, if we look at the global markets, we can see there's a lot of different figures. I think Dunham Trimmer do quite a good job of looking at the figures, but you have differences as to what technologies get included when you talk about biocontrol or biorationals, etc. But what is clear is that the combined annual growth rate is growing. There's variation by how much, but it is growing. The forecasts have been sitting around about 20% for the last decade or so, and the markets are actually meeting that. So the market for these technologies is growing fast, and the projected market value for these is high. I'm sorry, I'm just... right. Yeah. So if the market's increasing, it means these technologies have been taken up. So what are the reasons why the technologies are taken up? And there are multiple reasons why they've been taken up. Such as around the mode of action, in terms of the different modes of action of how it manages pests and diseases. And we're not always looking to kill the pest or disease. What we're looking to do is to manage the population. So that might be by repellency, by reducing the attractiveness of the crop, and all these technologies are coming forward. The biorationals fit very well in an IPM or IVM approach because of target specificity, that you're not that you can balance them with other technology you're putting in the system. We're seeing a lot of interesting mode of action. Oftentimes the biorational substances don't have residues, so that helps with residue management, which means that you can use the technologies closer to harvest. but it also means that you can have greater contact between humans and the products that you're using, because you're not having adverse effects on operators and workers, for example. And a lot of the times the technologies, they comply with organic standards. So, what are the kind of technologies that we're talking about here? So, we're traditionally used to talking about macroorganisms, which is the use of insects, natural enemies, against other natural enemies, sort of ladybirds eating larvae. We've seen a lot of development of plant extracts and so extracting substances from plants, and these are called botanicals, plant extracts, and these can be relatively pure. We've got 98% purity. Sort of, you see that with a cold pressed orange oil, with eugenol, geraniol, thymol, something like that, all the way through to something which is much more complex, because it's the total plant extract. It contains everything that came from the plant. And we may never know within that mixture what is creating the effect, but it is all the components. Then, of course, we have microorganisms. This is a really well-known group of microorganisms. A well-known group of biorationals. And what we have is we'll have bacteria, fungi, and viruses against bacteria, fungi, and virus, and against insects. The newest development in these is bacteriophage, which is the bacterial viruses. We see those starting to come onto the market. But there's a lot of innovation around these technologies. There's a lot of innovation in terms of finding new species, but also then thinking about how these are produced, and different production methods can lead to different types of active substances that can be used. So you see some which are the total fermented product. So the microorganism's gone in the fermenter, it's used everything in the fermenter is in the product, through to others which are very refined. There are a refined spore powder that's used, or that you're using just one component of the microorganism. Then we've also sort of starting to see higher organisms being used, as people are looking at sort of mushrooms, wild collected mushrooms, and looking at to extract the components from them, so that we also can see within that microorganism, lower and higher microorganism category, we can see the secondary compounds being used, and these may be, again, more or less refined. And nowadays we're starting to see come forward the peptides and proteins and the RNAs. There's only a few actually coming forward onto the marketplace. A lot of these are under development, and a lot of these are in innovation, and they're just slowly coming forward. Then if we sort of think about how these are coming to the market, something with, just to illustrate this, if I look at some data from the European Union and looking at the rate of development and of active substance approvals, we can see that if we look at the green box, this is the biopesticides, the blue is the others. What we can see is the proportion of active substances coming forward is increasingly the biorational substances. What we can also see in the European Union is the rate of approval of the substances is not really changing. And this does create an issue. But what we have the situation now in Europe, again, if we're looking at that, we're sort of saying that over 40% of the plant protection products that come forward for approval by a control, and I'm hearing that's now getting close to 50%. We can see that the majority of substances coming forward were initially for insects, but now that's been taken over by technologies coming forward for fungi. Real gaps around technologies for weeds and for nematodes, and then there's a few other sort of technologies coming forward. I'd say that what we're seeing in Europe is represented globally, this same ratio of the types of substances coming forward. And when I look across different regulatory authorities about the number of new actives coming forward, I'm seeing that it's increasing, and it's not unusual to be getting towards the 50% of the new technologies coming forward are biocontrol substances. But as we look at them coming forward and think about the product development pathway and what's happening with innovation, what I'm talking about here is the technology readiness levels. And traditionally, if we look at this sort of scheme that was developed by NASA about how to think about the product development pathway and how technologies are coming forward and how fast they're coming forward, it's actually a really long and slow process. So what I see is there's an incredible amount of innovation. So there's a lot of people working at the TRL levels 1, 2, and 3, and maybe getting to 4. And it's highly innovative. It's looking really widely at what biorationals are. But then they seem to have this stall phase where they're trying to get past that 4, 5, and 6 stage, which is the proof of concept, starting to build out into larger trials, looking to have additional investment coming in, and the timeline starts to slow down. And then when you get to sort of 7, 8, 9, where you're looking at, okay, how do we register something? How do we show proof of concept in the field? It really slows down. And then you hit registration, it's getting really, really quite slow. And so whilst we have this high level of innovation around the world, we're seeing, and I'm seeing investments going into that very early stage. The investment for that middle stage is really slowed down, and a lot of technologies are getting stuck in this space. There's a lot of reasons for that. I'm sure a lot of you know what those reasons are. But one of the things that is a drag on the development of the new technologies is registration. So I just kind of pulled together this look at what's going on around the world. And it's quite interesting to see that most countries are working on the 2 to 3 year time frame for getting something registered. Now that's quite a long time because it means you've done all your development work, you've invested very heavily in your product development, you've invested very heavily in your registration, and you've got to go through this period of registration where you're not able to generate any funds. And if you look at the European Union sitting at 5 to 10 years, it's the real question is how on earth does a company, how does a new technology survive when you've got such a pause in innovation? But also it means that the farmers are not getting these new technologies they need to support what they're doing in plant protection and what they're doing in vector control. Some countries are showing illustrations of going really fast. I mean, we all know that the USA has had the biopesticide registration scheme for over 30 years now, and they were going fast. I mean, a year ago, they sort of said, we're getting so many applications without an increase in funding. We're going to slow down because we just can't deal with the amount of applications, which is great for innovation, but it's slow for the product development. Brazil has looked at improving the legal system and then the regulatory system, and we can see a big speed up in Brazil about the number of technologies coming forward. And they made their change in about 2013, 2014, and we can see that the number of active substances coming forward has tripled and quadrupled in that time. So Brazil now has the highest number of active substances available, sitting at well over 600. When you compare that to somewhere like Europe, which is looking at 200, slightly above, the US is about 350, 400 of these technologies coming available. So we can see pockets of really good practice. We can see really good examples of how we have a facilitating environment in countries, and this makes a big difference. If you have a government that facilitates the technologies and facilitates the and supports the biorationals coming forward, it really helps because they're not the same as the chemical technologies. They are more complex, more knowledge intense, and they need a different skill set, and you need a highly skilled set of people. But we have that problem is that chicken and egg is with the regulators, train people if they only got a few applications. And it's taken a while for there to be enough applications, for there to be specialist trained people, but we can see that starting to come in. And what I'd like to see, if I had to look around the world, is we see more of the situation in the US and in Brazil, where you have a separate regulatory agency or separate processes for biorationals with skilled people and can speed up the process of taking them forward to the market. Just moving on and thinking, what's that regulatory drag doing to the development of technology and the availability of technology. So we can, if we think about microorganisms, we currently have systems and provisions for these. We've seen an update in the European Union of the new data provisions for these. We're seeing that micrometabolites only coming forward. There is some provisions for those. They go through the system as chemicals, but they're obviously complex mixtures. Given that they're derived from microorganisms, it's quite usual to have rapid degradation with them, so they're not highly persistent systems. So you can take a different approach to the regulation. I'm also seeing a lot of work being done for using microorganisms as what I call biofactories, which is where the microorganism has been genetically engineered, usually to overexpress a particular secondary compound, or to put in the genes for coding for a compound, and they're used as a mechanism for developing quite complex substances. There is some regulatory provisions for those, but less. That takes a lot more explaining. For selected microorganisms with GM, we're not seeing those coming to the market yet. I'm not seeing a clear regulatory pathway for it outside of the US for those types of technologies. For botanicals, complex mixtures, we're seeing that there is a regulatory provisions. It is still difficult though, because you were dealing with complex mixture and the regulatory systems were set up to deal with single substances. Synthesized botanical mixtures, beginning to see this coming onto the market. That's fairly new. And of course, the large category of semiochemicals, they go through as chemicals, but there are now provisions to make it simpler and saying, well, you don't need to provide certain pieces of information. So again, we're seeing differences in practice that are trying to unlock and how to get these technologies available. But in terms of policy, sorry, some of the slides haven't come through, but in terms of policy, this is an example of an interesting paper where they're looking at what is the drag on governments moving forward in policy and speeding up in the transition to biocontrol, and why is it taking so long? And I think it's worth sort of thinking about this and thinking that we're working in this wider policy context, and how do we influence policy to be more facilitating for these technologies? How do we get governments to put more money to support them, not just in terms of the research and innovation, product development, but in terms of the regulatory pathways and delivery into farmers? So when we think about biorationals that we actually have and how they move forward, I wanted to look at, well, we talk about integrated pest management, integrated vector management, and we talk about it as saying it's something new. And I sort of spent some time a little while ago thinking, well, when was this concept first considered? And it was actually in the 1950s. And I put this picture in here as well, because that's how they were planting potatoes in the 1950s. And I think it's clear to all of us that agriculture and technology has moved on a long time since then. And integrated pest management is not a new technology. It's not a new approach, but it seems that we're only now really beginning to embrace and implement this well. And it's taken a long time for us to get here. But what does integrated pest management, integrated vector management mean? Well, it's the management of pest and disease. First of all, we sort of look at what natural populations, what are our preventative practices, how can we change the habitat for the pest or disease? Are we planting the right crop in the right place? We then spend a lot of time, you're meant to spend a lot of time thinking, monitoring, forecasting. And this is an area that's unlocked recently because there's such a good movement in digital technologies to improve monitoring and forecasting, whether this be on a small farm scale or this be on a large landscape scale. We're much better at having good predictive models and understanding pest and disease development. And then you should come in with a physical and mechanical control. So in crops, it's like putting a fleece over a carrot crop to stop the carrot fly, or the use of the treated bed nets. And then if some of these technologies don't work, you come in with biocontrol. And then at the end of that, if that doesn't work, you come with chemical control. Some of this is to preserve the chemical technologies we have, but often because the chemical technologies have a wider unintended effect. So we're trying to reduce that. But what I'm seeing increasingly being developed is the decision to no longer use chemical pesticides. And I know some of the international organisations are trying to move towards a world where they're not using synthesized chemistry or using technologies which are very specialised. So that's the context of IPM, but that IPM and IVM concept is working in quite a new environment. If we just think about plant production, the innovation in plant production methods is really rapid in changing. A lot of this is driven around lack of labour. So it's trying to come up with automated systems that reduce the labour requirement on farms. But some of it is because the technology allows this to happen now. So what we're trying to now do is we're trying to take this integrated integrated pest management technologies into a world in which the world is changing. So again, it increases the complexity of what we're trying to do. So if we think about what's the future of plant production, so we have all these lovely technologies, and we see these new technologies coming forward, like, as I mentioned, the RNAis, the peptides, the proteins coming forward, refined microorganisms, understanding microorganisms more and understanding which components we need. We have a really unlocking of the potential of these technologies by improvements in digital farming, improvements in forecasting. So we can sort of see if you take some of the use of drones and the ability of drones to work in very cryptic habitats, which previously we couldn't do. But what's also laid on top of that is an increase in research into this area. And in the research, if we're thinking about climate, thinking about varietal responses, defense mechanisms. So as we start to think of this as biologists and not as chemists, we realize that there is a lot more going on in the soil environment of the plant, in the plant variety, in the way in which these technologies can move. And if I had to forecast, I would think in future we will see plants that are bred and that we use technologies to trigger plant defenses at specific times. And we will see fields where we have multiple genetic varieties, but they all harvest and crop at the same time.
If possible.
For me?
Yes. Please, just a little bit louder.
Is this better?
That's okay. Yes, that is better.
Oh, so sorry.
Thank you.
You can't hear me. Do you want me to go back over anything?
We have some chat, so if people missed some things, they can reach out with the questions. We could hear you. It was just got a little bit low, but that's better. Thank you.
I'm going to move my blind, and then I can get closer.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry, sunny day. I was probably moving back from the microphone. Yeah. So what I was saying here, this in a way summarizes a lot of what I'm saying. So we have these really lovely technologies. We've got microorganisms, we've got botanicals, we've got semiochemicals, and we're seeing new innovation coming forward. What's unlocking that innovation is ways in which we can deliver that technology to the crop or to the plant or to the field site. But what we're also finding out as we're researching and really embracing this as biologists and not as chemists, we have a lot of variables coming in. We've got the variation that climate change is causing. We've got changes in varietal responses, defense mechanisms. But there's some really lovely work now coming along, which is understanding about what happens in the soil environment. So I mean, this is probably obvious to other people, but I was sort of sitting at a meeting and somebody was talking about understanding the soil microbiome and the volatiles produced. And I know microorganisms produce volatiles, but what they were showing is that production of volatiles was changing and uplifting or down-regulating and up-regulating the plant mechanisms, and sort of so sudden realization that there's this volatile effect. We've always known that plants exude substances which can attract natural enemies, can increase the effect of the natural enemies. So, for example, you can put trichoderma, which is for managing plant diseases, on maize, and it then causes the maize to send out a signal to the natural enemy to come and kill it. So we know there's these complex interactions. What we're beginning to do is to understand these complex interactions and to be able to start to capture those. So what I can see in the future of plant production, well, starting to come in now, is increasing complexity, really knowledge intensive. And our challenge is, how do we capture that in a way that we can deliver solutions to the farmer, which are manageable and understandable? But what I think we can see coming forward is we're less selling litres of substances and more selling knowledge around how to use these technologies. And so if I think about what's happening in the future of plant production, it is all of these elements coming together, understanding what's happening to the plant in the field more. And by unlocking that, we can unlock how we can have higher quality food production, meet sustainable development goals, and start to be able to deliver the farmers some really good solutions. And if we reflect on that in terms of vector management, we're seeing the same things happening. We're seeing the same range of technologies beginning to come forward. We're seeing a range of assistive technologies in the digital sphere, which can support those technologies. But we're faced with a lot of other challenges, such as the changing in climate and how that's changing life cycles. We're seeing changes in host responses and defense mechanism. We're seeing habitat changes. We're seeing changes in human patterns of human behavior, where humans are living. We're also seeing improvements in human health globally, which is changing how humans are able to respond to the disease pest pressures. But one of the things we're seeing is new emergent pests, and that's a challenge, is how we can quickly respond to those and how biocontrol can quickly respond to them. So to try and understand a little bit about just how much is changing, I had a look at publications in this area. So I picked up keywords that are associated with a movement towards integrated pest management, integrated vector management. And if you look at what's in the publications in blue, which was in the period 2014 to 18, and compare that to 2019 and 2024, and see the rapid increase in research and publications in this area, you can see that we've really moved away from the log phase of this development, and we've moved away from the lag phase and we're into the log phase. We see there's a really strong uptick in research in this area. The challenge we have is how to move that research into good products and to support farmers and humans to have better disease control and better health options. So what I see is the future of plant production or what I'm seeing in the evidence around me, is plant production is going to be a complexity of pulling all of these technologies together, of pulling how we manage the knowledge, how we gather the knowledge, and who's going to deliver the knowledge to the farmer, and how well can they deliver the knowledge to the farmer. Then for vectors, what is being promoted is the One Health approach, where they want the health responses to be tied into improving environmental health, improving plant and animal health to feed humans well, as well as improving human health. And the aim is to fit within this. So where I see what's happening in biorationals, what's going on in the world, is as we're at a really interesting point, and probably the most change I've seen in my entire career. So we had the system that was set up in the 1960s for high input systems, and those systems did really well. And to some extent, we've known about biocontrol. I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years. I learned from other people who are doing this. So we knew that there was biocontrol. But what we're seeing is biocontrol coming into practice. And So we're changing our crop protection model. We're starting to change our vector management models as well. But to do this, we need a vast knowledge. It's not just about being an insect pathologist. It's not just being a plant pathologist. It's about needing soil ecologists, plant ecologists. You need to think of things on a landscape scale, especially if you're dealing with vector management. You need to have a really good understanding of genetics. Much better understanding of plant physiology, and sort of not trying to do sort of single gene changes, but look at multiple gene changes, about thinking about the genetics we have across a field, across a crop, and trying to model and trying to capture this. And yes, we still need the chemistry, but to some extent, the chemistry we need to look after that. We need to be careful not to build up resistance. We need to be careful not to move forward. So I hope you've kind of found that interesting as a high-level overview of what I can see in the world happening with biorationals, and I'm really open to any questions that you have.